The previous video outlined the basic factors involved in the earliest stages of human agricultural development, particularly in the region known as the Fertile Crescent. As explained previously, sedentary human societies as we understand them originated after 12,000 BC, following the rise in global temperatures and humidity that accompanied the end of the last glacial maximum. These changes in climate naturally caused some areas of the globe to seed and breed significantly higher populations of potentially domesticable plant and animal species than was previously possible, including such regions as the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, the Sahel, and New Guinea. Thus, it was in these 6 regions that humans found enough food resources to first justify long-term settlement, something that was nearly impossible to achieve before the change in climate, with only rare achievements such as Jawalapuram in southern India. By 10,000 BC, hunter-gatherer bands in each of those 6 regions of Earth, typically consisting of extended families, were settling into tribes of allied clans consisting of hundreds of people, with the largest populations first developing in the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent offered a variety of altitudes and topographies, from the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea, to mountains as high as 18,000 feet in the Caucasus. It included savannas and plateaus thriving with game and wild cereals, woods and forests containing a plethora of edible fruits, vegetables, roots, and nut trees, and alluvial floodplains suitable for basic agriculture. Within the Fertile Crescent, there was a great river called the Araxes River, today called the Aras River, which flowed outwards from the Armenian Valley towards eastern Turkey. There it split into 4 rivers, along which the earliest tribal villages of the Fertile Crescent were settled. The first of the 4 rivers was the Tigris River, along which was settled the great villages of Kayanu and Halan Chemi. The second river was the Euphrates, along which was settled Navali Kori, Murabet, and the hill town of Abu Huraira. In addition, there were significant tributary rivers of the Euphrates, along which the great villages of Haran, Urfa, and Gobekli Tepe were settled. Third was the Gihon River and its tributaries, along which were settled the towns of Al-Jadida, Aswad, Jericho, and Ain Ghazal. The fourth river was the Paishon, along which was settled the great village of Asliki Hoyuk. Again, these were not the only settled tribes in the region, but being settled along the most fertile great rivers, these tribes are quite representative, as they were the largest and most complex communities of humans which existed in the world at that age. Note that these names are often given by modern archaeologists and historians, and don't necessarily reflect the languages of the people who lived there. All of these great villages came to engage in a culture which has been termed by archaeologists and anthropologists as the Pre-Pottery Neolithic A. The Pre-Pottery Neolithic A culture consisted of a mixed strategy of hunting meat using spears, atlatls, and bows and arrows, as well as gathering wild fruits, vegetables, tubers, grains, pulses, nuts, and mushrooms, increasingly supplemented by domesticated animals and large gardens of cereals or pulses in the home village. Many people also caught fish using spears or flax nets. Domesticated dogs were sometimes eaten, but they were more often used as hunting companions or guard dogs. Pigs and cattle were first domesticated at Kayanu and spread out in popularity from there. Herds of sheep and goats were tended by nomadic pastoralists living along the Aras River, and from there it spread along the region's river systems. The settled villages made increasingly heavy use of slash-and-burn tactics to fertilize their crop fields, until it was discovered that animal manure could be used as an alternative. They made stone tools and weapons from chert or flint stones like those of their Paleolithic ancestors, but they were of gradually increasing artistic and practical quality. New tool-making industries developed, including the use of wooden hoes or digging sticks for tilling fields, and crude hand scythes for the cutting of crops which grew well in the dark, rich soils on the alluvial banks of great rivers. During the 9000s BC, the use of the mortar and pestle for grinding grains became widespread, as did the ability to make fire, which had previously been a specialized skill known only to relatively few experts amongst the band or tribe. A major food staple would have been the ash cake, or fire cake, a patty of ground cereal grain which was baked hard over a fire pit. The kiln or earthen oven had not yet been invented, so there was no true baked clay pottery during this time. Rather, their containers and eating bowls were aceramic earthenware, and were still made in the old Cro-Magnon way, by molding clay and mud by hand into the desired shape and then baking it as hard as possible in a fire pit. The result is often quite functional, but is not beautiful. Houses during this period were typically made using mud, sand, water, and straw, molded by hand into bricks which were then left out to dry in the hot sun. These mud brick homes were often supplemented by cut wood and reeds for binding. Sometimes only the base of the house was mud bricks and the walls and ceiling were wood and reeds, but it would have largely depended upon personal choice and available materials. Besides all this, the peoples of this period retained many of the same practices as their hunter-gatherer ancestors. These great villages would continue to grow to populations of about 500 to 1,000 people each. The populations of Murabet and Göbekli Tepe may have even exceeded 1,000, and some towns in Canaan, such as Jericho and Ein Ghazal, supported populations of 2,000 to 3,000 people each. Many of the larger villages in the Fertile Crescent contained a cult house, considered the most important building in the village in which the local shamans engaged in their rituals. By 9000 BC, some people began experimenting with the design of their towns and villages, such as Byblos on the Mediterranean coast. They possessed a commercial harbor with longboats that exported cedar wood, which due to their location they possessed in great abundance. They developed 2-story houses with cedar ladders and plaster flooring which was made using slaked lime derived from limestone. They appear to have had a sophisticated limestone quarrying operation, as they had access to a significant amount of it. They mined and pulverized the limestone and then heated it to a temperature of 900 degrees Celsius to achieve calcination, removing the impurities from the lime, which could then be worked into a plaster in order to waterproof people's homes. This would indicate that Byblos, or perhaps one of the villages or towns conquered by Byblos, must have developed the kiln during this period, as there was no other way that the people of Byblos could have derived lime from limestone. Their burial customs were changing as well, as the town began burying their dead in a specified cemetery, rather than on individual family property, which was the regional custom at the time. This style of house spread in usage from Byblos to more of the Levant over the course of the 8000s BC, sometimes by peaceful blueprint copying or idea diffusion, but other times invasively, as in circumstances where it coincided with other notable changes in culture. At this time, Byblos was developing longer and narrower arrowheads that utilized hanging, as well as smoke weapons made from quicklime, which were capable of intensely burning an enemy's livestock and causing permanent blindness. All along the Gihon River and its tributaries, great villages as far north as Al-Judaida and as far south as Aswad were defeated by Byblos. And archaeologists have found that their subsequent layers of habitation contain not only new houses utilizing lime plaster, but also a large number of polished stone arrowheads, spearheads, and other cultural artifacts primarily consistent with those manufactured in Byblos at the time. This would make Byblos one of the earliest known proto-chiefdoms in history. Around 8500 BC, this was a relatively new form of government, characterized by a chief settlement taking tribute from conquered settlements, whom they considered defeated subjects with fewer privileges. If a tribe primarily grows cereals or pulses, the chieftain takes a portion of the harvested crop. If the tribe primarily herds animals, the chief takes a portion of these, and he can even force the people of the conquered settlement to engage in the occupations of the chief's choice, rather than be allowed to perform the activities that they would personally prefer to. Agriculture intensified during this time, and the main reasons behind why it eventually spread around the world can be found seated in this period of development, which has been termed the Pre-Pottery Neolithic B by archaeologists and anthropologists. Village walls made from wooden palisades were made stronger and more extensive as the wars for land and resources increased. The cobblestone walls of Jericho and Ein Ghazal were extended and reinforced, and citadels were eventually built from stone and mud bricks. From a mixed strategy of hunting, gathering, farming, and herding came a gradually greater emphasis on farming and herding, with hunting and gathering gradually becoming less popular until, by the later 8000s BC, it was becoming a specialized occupation in the region. Large querns for the grinding of grains in large quantities increased in frequency. More and more people began tending animals, typically pigs, cattle, sheep, and/or goats, and growing farms of cereal grains including emmer wheat, einkorn wheat, barley, and/or rye, as well as pulses including peas, chickpeas, lentils, and the so-called bitter vetch, which many villages utilized as animal feed. No settlements in this period possessed all of the major crops and livestock available. Different villages and towns had different combinations. In addition, the cultivation of the fiber crop flax began becoming more widespread around this time, after artificial selection for flax seeds in Syria had begun evolving breeds with better yields than wild flax. Flax seeds were edible, but their main use was for making strong ropes and linen fabric, and they were utilized for their oil as well, termed linseed oil. Flax seeds at the time were more than 25% oil, and some modern breeds of flax are nearly 50% oil. This completed the package of Neolithic founder crops which would remain prevalent throughout the entire history of human farming, and today they're grown all around the world. It began with the further expansion of proto-chiefdoms like Byblos into their respective border territories, many of which were still largely inhabited by hunter-gatherers, both settled tribes and nomadic bands. It became understood that these peoples could not be induced or intimidated into embracing the agricultural lifestyle, since they had seen farming and herding and chose not to engage in it. Practically every encounter between agriculturalists and hunter-gatherers has eventuated in paranoia and mutual mistrust. In these heated rivalries, the agriculturalists have had the advantage that they were capable of producing more food for more people, and their permanent settlements were allowing them to gradually select for larger yields. Cultivated cereal grains and pulses were growing longer stalks, larger pods, and were becoming more numerous than what hunter-gatherers could come up with. Domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats tripled in number, providing milk, wool, and additional protein for growing populations of herders and farmers, as well as for developing cults and priesthoods. All of these factors allowed agricultural settlements to achieve higher populations and population densities, which could then develop more agriculture, more herd animals, and more settlements. The hunter-gatherers found themselves outnumbered and outcompeted, either forced to retreat into territory without settled agriculture, or else be killed by the weapons of settled farmers and herders. They were also devastated by contagious diseases spread by livestock, to which Byblos and other agricultural towns and villages had developed some genetic resistance after generations of being infected and partially killed off by them. Both wild and domestic pigs, for example, are well known to be capable of spreading certain breeds of influenza to humans, which can be quite deadly to people whose genes have not prepared them for it. Domesticated pigs, goats, sheep, and cattle can all suffer from tuberculosis, brucellosis, and leptospirosis, all three of which can spread to humans who variously come into contact with the animal's breath, saliva, blood, urine, or feces. Note that coming into contact with domesticated animal feces was becoming a regular agricultural practice for the purpose of utilizing it as soil fertilizer, and that coming into contact with the raw fluids of animals was and is an inevitable result of the slaughtering process. Even worse, irresponsible farmers sometimes feed their cattle the deceased remnants of cattle, causing them to develop the prion disease mad cow, a universally lethal wasting illness that will also kill humans who eat the infected cow's meat. These terrifying diseases, and numerous others, were first introduced to humans on a large scale as a direct result of widespread animal domestication. By 7000 BC, the Fertile Crescent was becoming a shifting socio-political landscape of developing agricultural proto-chiefdoms, who began a practice of enslaving hunter-gatherers and one another.